Good evening. Tonight I start with a quote. It is the most revolutionary development in India because behind it are all the forces which, when released, will change the structure of the country. That was Jawaharlal Nehru and that was 1960. He, of course, was talking about the Panchayati Raj system, which was first introduced in that year. More than half a century later, India has 2.5 lakh panchayats, 32 lakh representatives, including 12 lakh women who are democratically elected. Every year, April 24 is celebrated as the National Panchayat Raj Day in India, and hence this edition of The Big Picture will talk all things Panchayat. I think we will all agree that the Panchayati Raj system is one of the most important cornerstones of the democratic structure in India, and some would say the perfect vehicle to decentralize administration to the very basic level. But has India, more than 50 years after the Panchayati Raj was ushered in and more than 20 years after it was constitutionalized, have we decentralized targets? Have we met it? Our decentralization targets? An expert committee report has recommended decentralization of planning to reflect local priorities so that panchayats can ensure last mile delivery. The report also points out that though the central government has increased its spending on centrally sponsored schemes by 25%, India hasn't progressed proportionately on the Human Development Index. India's position remains stagnant, still ranked 136th out of 186 countries. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight on The Big Picture, we discuss the Panchayati Raj system in India, its effectiveness or the lack of it, the challenges in the field, and whether India's decentralization targets are still way above what can really be achieved on the ground. Joining me right now will be Mr. George Mathew. He is the Chairman, Institute of Social Sciences. Also joining me will be Maithili Bosnurmat, Consulting Editor, The Economic Times. We have some other guests lined up as well. I'll introduce them as and when we go along. I want to start the show, however, if I could, with Maithili. Many thanks, Maithili, for joining us on this show. The way I see it, the aim of a panchayat, at least when we set out with the system in the 1960s, was to decentralize administration so that people get the right to run administration themselves. Correct me if I'm wrong. On the face of it, Maithili, would you say that we've been able to achieve that, at least even in part, if not completely?
Well, Athar, very, very fractionally. I think we have a long way to go because despite all the lip service that has been made to Panchayati Raj, I don't think governments anywhere, either at the centre or at the states, are seriously interested in devolution. Power they would like to centralize, whether it is a centre unwilling to transfer power to the states, and likewise the states unwilling to transfer some of the powers that they enjoy to the lower levels. So I think the fault lies both with the centre and with the states. So unfortunately, the dream of devolution has really not been realized at all. I would say a beginning has been made, but if after 20 years we should still say that a beginning only has been made, it just shows how little progress we've made and how much more remains to be done.
Right. Maithili, I want to take that point and take it to Mr. George Mathew over here. Maithili said the states haven't really, done devolution that well. That is a big question when we talk about Panchayati Raj. Not all states have helped in the devolution of power. Do you think that the central government can play a bigger role in this?
It is a state subject according to the Constitution of India. We have a federal system and there is a constitution amendment and the implementation is at the state level. And this is the third stratum of governance, district and below.
Right.
But the states are not taking this devolution seriously. The union government can oversee how things are happening and also it can facilitate how the 73rd Constitution Amendment, the 74th Constitution Amendment, that can be implemented in letter and spirit.
Right.
That facilitation has to be from the federal government at the union level. But at the state level, what I find is there is a lack of political will.
To actually enforce or try and implement devolution.
Absolutely.
Right.
We have all the guidelines, we have all the, perhaps the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments. They are the best amendments one can think of at the moment. Of course, nothing is perfect. But if we had implemented that in the last 2 decades or so, the country the rural India, the urban India would have been totally different.
Would you say, Mr. Matthew, that all states are guilty of not taking this seriously, or do you think there are some errant states who are playing truant?
I will not say all states. There are states which have done extremely well.
Do we have examples?
I have examples. For instance, the state of Kerala. It had done extremely well. West Bengal had done very well.
I think Tripura also figures in that list.
Tripura is doing extremely well even now. Karnataka had done very well at one time. Sikkim or Himachal Pradesh, some of these states are doing very well. But a consistent progress is what is needed today.
Right. I think we've also been joined heavy by Mr. Nilotpal Basu. I think he's about to join us. I'll come back to him in just a bit. Yes, I've been told that he's joined the Big Picture. Thank you, Mr. Basu, for joining us on the Big Picture.
Thank you.
We are talking about Panchayati Raj since today is Panchayati Raj Day. Maithili, your co-panelist, seems to think that we have achieved very fractionally, though, the dream of decentralizing power, devolution of power. Our decentralization targets have been achieved very, very fractionally. Looking back at it, sir, do you think we could have done better in over 50 years since it was first introduced?
Addressed to me, right?
That's for Mr. Basu.
I think, as Mr. Matthew was mentioning, whenever the left has been in office in the states, we have tried to seriously take this forward, because our understanding is, in a country as huge and as diverse as India, actually there is no alternative to decentralized devolution of powers. Unfortunately, what has happened in many states, as was mandated by the Constitution Amendment, the state level finance commissions, which would decide on what share of resources would actually go to these local self-governments, at the three-tier local self-governments, that was not decided. And then there is also certain dithering on transferring areas or subjects which would be dealt with by the panchayat bodies. And third problem was that over the years we have seen a large number of centrally sponsored schemes coming in, even in areas on lists which belong to the state. And these centrally sponsored schemes actually have a lot of inflexibility in terms of taking into account the specific situation which is obtaining at the grassroots level. I think there is a disturbing tendency towards centralization, which has been around simultaneously, which has been thwarting the degree to which achievements could have been scored.
Mr. Basu, I'll come back to you. We've also been joined by a new guest right now. Tehseen Poonawalla is a political analyst. Many thanks, Tehseen, for joining us on the Big Picture. The budget allocation for the Panchayati Raj Ministry has been increased 10 times.
From 600 crores to 6,000 crores.
From around 700 crore to over 6,000 crores now.
Yes.
Now, the PM on the occasion, the Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, on the occasion of Panchayati Raj Day has said, and I'm quoting him, "We must try and make sure Panchayati Raj doesn't just become a slogan but a reality in our lifetime," unquote. Do you see that happening in our lifetime?
Well, the challenge actually is for the states to show political will in implementing the Panchayati Raj institution. That's number one. Number two is, to implement what Article 40 of the Constitution says. So that's number one. We've seen that a lot of changes are remaining only on paper. For example, when you have reservations for women, we see that it is women who contest as proxy. So how can these challenges actually transform in a real sense is the challenge before us. So
and that's a big problem. Yes. Proxies getting in and becoming candidates, but then, Mr. Matthew, coming to you, but then the actual decisions being taken by the male members of their family. That's a big, big challenge.
Yes, in a sense it was in the beginning, but not now.
Do you think the situation is
Yes,
better?
I have done field studies about that, and I can very well say that over the last 20-25 years, things are changing to a better level. There were proxies and all this, family members were coming. You know, for any person to work in public life, they need support. If I am working in public life, I need support from my wife, from my family. Just like that, a lady is working, entering public life, and then she needs support. But of course, there are extremes. But I am very happy to say that the field studies show that the first year, second year, the women may be depending, the third and fourth and fifth year, they are independent.
Right.
And that's a radical change which is happening in
Okay,
India.
point taken, point taken. I want to go very quickly to Maithili before I take a break. Maithili, the question to you is, there is a criticism, some people have opined that these institutions, they don't have powers to raise money, they don't have any financial powers. The argument here, Maithili, is that if they're not being allowed to raise any money, how can one expect them to function effectively? What is your position on that?
Well, that's only partly true, Athar. Yes, a great deal of the powers, financial powers, have not been devolved to them. But even where powers, they do have powers, as in the case of property tax, for instance, they have not been fully utilized. So it's a bit of, the fault lies on both sides. And here I must add, Athar, that it's not often that I find myself agreeing with the left. Right. But I must agree entirely with Mr. Nilotpal Basu when he says that the center has really been showing a tendency to centralize. And rather than devolution, what we're seeing is more and more of centrally sponsored schemes, which increasingly step into the turf of the state and thereon to the panchayat level. So if I may just be allowed to quote very quickly from the expert committee report presented by Manishankar Iyer, he puts the nail on the head, he hits the nail on the head when he says, Panchayati Raj has been seriously suburban by establishing parallel bodies under the centrally sponsored schemes that are neither embedded in the system nor have an organic link to it. In consequence, all responsibility in these bodies is upward to officers and now downwards to the people in the gram and ward sabhas. Outlays are not commensurate with outcomes. And I think this is exactly what the position is.
Point taken, Maithili. I want Tehseen to respond to that in just a moment, though. We'll take a small break right now. We'll come back on the big picture. Lots more to discuss. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the big picture. We're discussing the Panchayati Raj system in our country today. Of course, the 24th April, we celebrate this as Panchayati Raj Day. 20 years since we gave constitutional powers to our Panchayati Raj system. Tehseen Poonawalla, you heard what Maithili said before the break. Do you think the centre, particularly this government, has a tendency to centralise things rather than work towards a devolution of power?
Actually, I disagree on that because, I'll give you a number of facts. We discussed that in the 12th plan, the funding has been increased by many times, almost 10 times, so it's about 6,000 crores. So the government was not serious about Panchayati Raj. Why would they do that? In 2004, the government of India, under the Ministry of Panchayati Raj, had 7 roundtable conferences across the country where they discussed the various challenges before Panchayati Raj. MOUs were signed with the state government so that there could be transfer of powers. I'll tell you whether that's one of the things. We've seen Rajiv Gandhi, the late Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, who actually revolutionized Panchayati Raj system. Rahul Gandhi today carries forward that vision, and in all sense, he is the leader of the Congress, which is the ruling party. So he believes in the Panchayati Raj system. He's time and again made this clear, whether it was at the Chintan Shivir, whether recently the CIA conference. So he's the one who's talking about how to empower people down the ground, and the real empowerment comes through Manrega. Manrega is an example of this, where the Panchayati Raj decides what is the kind of infrastructure work that needs to be done. Manrega has been a success. The kind of employment it's set up, 53% of the people employed there in the rural employment is women. So they cannot be a greater success. It is the world's largest employment guarantee.
But you wouldn't agree that the centrally sponsored schemes, although they're well-meaning, they're kind of hampering a devolution of power? You wouldn't agree?
No, I don't agree, because it is the schemes that the work that needs to be carried out, the identification of the work, the allocation of the work, all that happens at the Panchayati Raj, at the ground level. That doesn't happen at the central level. Center just releases the fund. So there are challenges, yes. And how can you even give more powers? I'll tell you what the challenge is where the states haven't given all the 29 functions that should be given in the Panchayati Raj, should be given to the Panchayati Raj institutes. That has not been transferred. So it is the state governments that haven't transferred. That is where the challenge is.
So point taken. Yes. I saw Mr. Mathew shaking his head. I'll come to you in just a bit. But before that, I want to go to Mr. Nilotpal Basu. Mr. Basu, another criticism, moving slightly away from the center-state fight here, another criticism in these institutions has been, our Panchayati Raj system has been, that it's not all that seamless. On top of the 3 tiers, you have a district magistrate. On top of him, there's a bureaucrat, which some people opine is often an impediment in their functioning. Your thoughts on that?
You see, your political expert is so enamored by this Rajiv Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi.
So we'll talk about that in just a
lineage.
bit.
No. I am coming to that. I am answering your question.
Right.
You see, this is the problem. Your expert does not understand the difficulty in implementing centrally sponsored scheme arises out of the inflexibilities of the stipulations that go along with the centrally sponsored schemes. So while you may allocate more money, but you release the money under conditions which becomes almost impossible to implement. Two, it is released at a point in time when, say, agriculture-based work, but the season that actually the money reaches the panchayat, it is inappropriate for utilization. Now, my point is, you see, you cannot cut out the state government in between. In fact, this money which is being allocated and the demand for grants which is raised, it is also being raised by Rural Development Ministry Babus sitting in Delhi. So the problem of bureaucracy will be there, but that is what we are saying, that if the schemes are transferred lock, stock and barrel to the states and allowing them the autonomy to actually evolve conditions which are more appropriate for the agroclimatic situation and other specificities arising in the grassroots level, then I think definitely efficiency of implementation will go up. You can have a very strong vigilance and monitoring mechanism, utilization certificate, assessment and all that.
But
But
Mr. Basu,
you see,
let me quickly
there
respond to
has to be a greater degree of autonomy and flexibility.
Point taken, sir. Tehseen, before I come to you, you'll get the chance to respond. I saw you shaking your head. I think you might have slightly different view from either Tehseen or Mr. Basu. Go for it.
See, panchayats are institutions of self-government. They are not administrative institutions. If it is government, then the government has the autonomy and power at that level. So I am not able to understand the centrally sponsored schemes and all that. It is the decision of the local government to do what they can and how the resources should be. Let me ask you a question. How many panchayats in this country at the district level have district planning system, which is scientific, effective and implemented?
I suspect the answer would be not many.
Not many. And 29 subjects are to be with the panchayats. 20 years have passed. Out of the 29 subjects, how many states have these 29 subjects passed to district, the block and the states and the villages? And this has not happened. And then the reality on the ground is anti-people. Power to the people. That was the point, and that is not given even today.
Point taken.
Let me just quickly respond to Mr. Basu. First of all, I'm not disputing that transfer of funds and functionaries cannot be made more transparent or that doesn't remain a challenge. Of course, that's a challenge before this nation, but it's a challenge on all aspects. About the question of Mr. Rajiv Gandhi's role, but the fact is Mr. Rajiv Gandhi started a movement in the 80s. He took this movement forward, so you cannot dispute that.
I think you are making a factual mistake.
Sir, just Mr. Basu, I did not interrupt you.
Mr.
Basu, I did not interrupt you. Please, Mr. Basu, please let me finish.
You had your time, sir.
And
He'll come
he
back to
has
you.
admitted that.
Mr. Basu will come back to you. Let him speak, please. Yes.
No, I think he is making a factual
Let
mistake.
him say his piece, sir. You will correct him later.
The fact is what Sir said is correct. The 29 subjects need to be transferred from the state. That's part number one. Part number two is, again, where Mr. Basu is factually wrong, is in a central government scheme. For example, Manrega, it is not the center that decides what project needs to be done. It is at the Panchayati Raj or the local level that's decided what needs to be done. The center only transfers the fund. The center does not get it. Of course, the center has its bureaucrats there for transparency's sake. Now, you need to bring in some account of transparency if the money is being sponsored by the central government. But to say that the center is involved in is force-feeding these subjects is wrong. That is not how it works.
I take your point, Tehseen. Yes. I want to go to Maithili before I come to Mr. Basu. Mr. Basu, I'll come to you.
Just a moment.
I'll come to you, sir.
He is not even aware.
I'll come to you, sir. Mr. Basu, I'll come to you.
Schedule of
Mr. Basu, I will come to you after this.
That was there. That had to be modified.
Mr. Basu,
subsequently through assiduous
Niluda,
struggle.
I'll come to you after this. You will say your piece, but before that, I want to get Maithili's opinion for just 2 minutes. Maithili, you heard both Mr. Basu and Tehseen. Please give us your opinion on their views.
Yeah, well, once again, I find myself in complete agreement with Mr. Nilotpal Basu. I couldn't agree with him more because India is a very heterogeneous kind of federation. We are a union of states, each state being completely, almost entirely different from the other state. So I'm strongly against centrally sponsored schemes where, contrary to what your other guest said, that Manrega is perhaps the only scheme which allows some amount of autonomy to the states. And even there, we've just seen the CAG report, which has pointed out to the huge amount of leakage that has happened, even in the Manrega scheme. All the other schemes, you have the centre trying to decide what is the single one, all-encompassing, wonderful model that only the centre tells you, that tells all the states to do. Sorry, that is not the way the country was meant to function. If you look at the constitution, there was a very strong urge to decentralize, to devolve power right down to the lowest level.
Right,
yes,
Maithili.
the states have not done their bit, but neither has the centre. And here I would hold the centre more guilty than the states.
Normally, I would take a break right now, but I want to go to Mr. Basu, then Tehseen, I'll come to you and we'll wind up with Mr. Matthew. Mr. Basu, very, very briefly, sir, make your point, sir.
No, I was saying that Tehseen is not even aware that the original schedule of works that was drawn up along with the Manrega, because we were personally also associated with this whole law and the scheme, that it was very inflexible in the beginning. Then we went on assiduously fighting, and then the list was expanded. It is absolutely not true that there are no final boundaries. There are boundaries, and I think Maithili was making a very correct point. You see, our country is so diverse. There are 5 agroclimatic zones. The soil conditions are different. So you cannot adapt a straight jacket for all states and all areas. Even there are differences in the specific conditions within districts, within
Got it.
blocks.
Mr. Basu, yes.
Well,
yes.
Mr. Basu is-
Tehseen, respond to that very briefly. I have some more questions.
Yeah.
Or we have to look towards the future as well.
Well,
Yes.
Mr. Basu should know that Russia and China, the countries that his party looks up to and where his ideological
this is
moorings
stupid.
are the worst record of decentralization.
Mr. Basu,
have the worst record
Mr.
of
Basu,
decentralization.
I mean,
Number one.
just
Number two, I
ask
think
him
that
to
the
stop
issue is being
making
confused by both
irrelevant
Maitri and by
points.
Mr.
Mr. Basu,
Basu. Both Russia and China, the worst record of decentralization. That's a fact, Mr. Basu.
I am
Right,
talking about
right.
the specifics
Yes, now we're
of
coming
India.
to India.
Tehseen,
Yes, now
Tehseen,
Mr.
let's
Basu
stick to-
coming
let's
to
stick to-
India.
I mean, we can debate Russia
let's-
and China later on and ideology of
Mr.
CPI.
Basu,
Where your party
I'm-
take its ideological
I mean,
inspirations
don't
from.
get agitated.
I must stop
So,
you both right
yes.
now. I must
So
stop you
anyways.
both right now. I have to go to Mr. Matthew right now. Empowerment of women. We seem to be digressing right now. I want to talk about Panchayati Raj and we want to look towards the future now. Okay, we haven't been perfect for the past 50 years and all. Empowerment of women because of the Panchayati Raj system must be one of the success stories that we can look towards. Take the case of Tripura, for example. The ruling left, and I have to give Mr. Basu this, has ensured that 50% of seats in all 3 tiers of the Panchayati Raj institution are reserved for women in Tripura. Now, these women, after being for generations doing household work and chores, have come out and become leaders. That surely must be one of the big success stories coming out of the Panchayati Raj system.
See, our case studies show that some of the best cases of development and commitment and best utilization of resources are in those panchayats headed by women. And they believe that the resources must be used for the benefit of the people. And I am very, very happy to say wherever women are heading these panchayats, they are doing extremely well. It started with the 25% of reservation for women in Karnataka in 1980, in the beginning of 1980s. And then it became 33% and now 50% for more than 15 states. It began in Bihar with Nitish Kumarji starting with 50%.
Right.
And it had a wonderful impact. And this is, in fact, what we need is 50-50, set the balance right.
Right, point taken, point taken. I have about 3 minutes left and I would request all my 3 remaining guests to stick to that time limit, 1 minute each, starting with Mr. Basu. Sir, you have 1 minute. What can we look towards the future now? What can we gain from our 50 years of experience and what is the way forward? Panchayati Raj, of course, is a brilliant institution in itself, but what can we learn from the past because we have to look towards the future? 1 minute, sir.
We have to move away from these centralizing tendencies and must master all the strength that is that is at our disposal to really make this a success. This is the only way that India can go forward and India can remain united.
Right, Mr. Basu, many thanks for sticking to that time limit. Tehseen, your turn.
We need to get to a stage of town hall level planning where local communities and local leadership decides the kind of development that they want. That is in this constitutional scheme of things, and we need to move towards that. And I think that India is moving towards that, whether it is Manrega, as much as Mr. Basu would politically like to disagree with me, or whether it is even the new land acquisition bill, where it is the locals who decide whether the land is given or no. And that's again a larger example of this. So whatever it is, I think we're moving towards that scheme.
Maithili Busnurmat, you've heard my three guests. Maithili, what is your take on it? How can we actually learn from what we haven't really done in the past 50 years, and what needs to be done now?
Well, I think concentrate on the 3 Fs. It's not my own idea, but certainly what I entirely agree with. 3 Fs, funds, functions, functionaries. If you focus on these and transfer all 3, then there's no reason why it should not be a success.
Right, Maithili, I have about 30 seconds left. Last word to you, Mr. Matthew.
We have to do everything to change the mindset of the people and for participatory governance, direct democracy at the Gram Sabha level and indirect democracy at the higher level. That synthesis and combination must work. Then Panchayat.
I think that's the key.
Rahul Gandhi said it.
I think that's the key takeaway. Gram Sabha level, direct democracy, and at indirect democracy at the higher level. Many thanks to all my guests. They might not agree all the time, but they do have some really good ideas. And I think more synergy is needed between Mr. Basu and Tehseen as well. Thank you, Maithili Busnurmat, for joining us on the program. Milokpal Basu, many thanks. It was a pleasure as always. Tehseen Poonawalla as well as Mr. George Mathew. That's all the time we have on The Big Picture. Athar Khan saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching.